lecture 3 of an introduction to computer science with Python. And today we'll be learning more about variables. You'll learn about name error. I'll tell you what that is. You won't have to know what it is, but you have to understand the general idea. And then you'll learn about something called a comment. Now before we start, I want to tell you that when I'll be using some acronyms and letters that you may not know, such as, for example, CS is really just short for computer science. So if you don't know my acronyms, then hope that I talk about them or Google them, because most of the acronyms that I use are pretty common. So these are the true variable naming guidelines. I believe that in the last lecture I told you to only use numbers, or only use letters. These are the true variable naming guidelines. They can't start with numbers because that's just how variables, the way the computer reads the variable doesn't allow for a number in the front. And normal variables that hold an expression. By the way, an expression is like a number or a string, which is a group of letters and numbers and characters in double quotation marks. A string or an int. There are other types, but those are all expressions. And variables that hold expressions should not start with capital letters. All caps variables, like number in all caps, represent constants but can change. So a constant is a value, an expression that never changes throughout your entire program. For example, let's say that I had a constant called 1 equals 1. If I had just a bunch of code here, and then here's the end of the program, if by the end of the program this 1 variable never changes or never was supposed to change, if it was never supposed to change, then I should put it in capital letters to remind myself and other people who are reading your code to know, hey, this variable called capitalized 1 is a constant. It never changes. And that could be a good thing if you're trying to find an error in your code or something that's making your code not work, because then you know, oh, the error is definitely not in 1 because 1 never changed. It's in something else. So that's just a note on constants. So constants, in short, are expressions, specifically variables that point to an expression. That expression never changes. And the next guideline is that they can only have letters, numbers, and this underscore. And for the most part in CS, computer science, underscore is a letter. But if you have a symbol in your variable, that won't work, because I think all of the symbols have a very, very specific use. And if you use it in a variable, then it stops it from working. For example, I'm holding shift down and running my finger down my number row above my letters, and it looks like this. None of those can be in your variable. Because they all have a very specific use. So in general, no symbols and you'll be good. So again, they can't start with a number, they shouldn't start with a capital letter, and all caps variables are constant. Now this is a little bit of a contradiction here, because I'm saying, oh, make your variables all caps if they are a constant, but all caps starts with a capital letter. This is an exception. When I say shouldn't start with a capital letter, you can still do it. But you don't want to do it because people may get confused if you do it. So that's just a little note. And a last thing about variable, like the actual meaning of the variable, you need to make the name of the variable meaningful. Because if you and I are working on a CS project together, and I am looking over your code, and I see a bunch of A's, B's, C's, D's, I, J, K, and X, Y, Z, I don't want to read it anymore, because I don't know what each variable does or means. And that's kind of important, at least to me, because if I know right off the bat what the variables mean, then I am much more likely to understand how your code works. And this is actually important for you as the person who created the code too, because if you wrote your code at like 10 p.m. or 11 or 12 at night, and then the next morning you look at it and you have no idea what you wrote. Variable names, a good variable name, will remind you what the variable does. And the last thing, very important, no keywords. You can't name your variable, for example, print. You can't name it print. For example, print equals 5. I can't do that. Because if I want to print, well, now the meaning of print has changed. It was from before a command to put stuff here, and now it's changed to just 5. And that will cause many errors. So in general, if your variable name has color in it, you don't want to name it that. Other variable names that you might see, other variable names with color include sum. See how it changed from black to purple? Max, min, input, and a bunch of others. And notice that when I typed in 4, like FOR, it turned a bluish color. That's still color. Don't name your variables for or if. See how that changed color? Or and. If it has color, if it's not black, change it. That's my 6-minute spiel on variable naming guidelines, but please remember these tips, because these tips will take you far. They will transfer onto advanced programming, other languages. By language, I mean Python is a language, and there are other languages that you may have heard of, like Java, or I'm not going to go into detail because that's rather advanced. But yes, these variable naming guidelines you'll find everywhere. So on the left, you have variables that work, and on the right, you have variables that don't. And these are all fine. If your variable name as a reader you want to see and make it look like it has spaces, use an underscore to make spaces, or you can have the capital letter of every word be capitalized, except for the first. So the first one is called I don't know the official name, but it just uses an underscore. And the second one is called camel case. And I think it's like that because if you search up a camel, you'll see that they look like this, right? And it starts off a little bit tiny, but every word behind it is capitalized or bigger. So every capital letter that follows it that represents a new word is like a hump on a camel. And then, as you can see here, variables can end with an underscore. They can also just have an underscore by itself. Again, they shouldn't start with capital letters. And then here on variables that don't work, this one starts with a number. It doesn't work. It also has an apostrophe. Believe it or not, apostrophe is actually a special character. It's a symbol, so don't use it. Otherwise, this variable is fine. So if you took off this, and if you took off the apostrophe, you'd be good. And there's the same idea here. So yeah, variables can't start with a letter, shouldn't start with a capital letter, and can't have symbols, and should be meaningful. Those are like the basic, what I just said in like 5 seconds. And now I want to introduce this new idea. It wants you to try to print the just Q. You may notice that I didn't call Q anything. I didn't say Q equals 2, 3, whatever. I didn't say any of that. I just said print Q. And you get an error. So here is the type of error that it is. It's called a name error. And it says name Q is not defined. And what this means is that Q doesn't have a point, it doesn't point to anything. So the computer didn't know what to do with it. So I just explained that here. So name Q is not defined means that you need to point Q to an expression or whatever before printing it. It doesn't necessarily have to be printing it, but it's just in general calling it, because you can use variables in other variables, for example. So you want to define your variable or create your variable here, or initialize the variable. Initialize just means like start. So you want to start by pointing the variable to something. Otherwise you'll get an error. So if you try to call the variable, in this case I'm printing it, before you actually point the variable to anything, then you'll get a name error. So make sure that before you use a variable, make it first. Because if you didn't, it would be like ordering a car on Amazon. I don't think there are cars on Amazon that you can buy. So you'd make the order, and then people at Amazon will be trying to find out, okay, this guy ordered a car, we don't have a car. And that presents problems, because if you don't have a car, how are you going to get the car? So you have to make sure that before you buy the car, you have to make sure that it exists first. And this is the name error visualized. So these are the two commands that I use. So Q equals 5, print Q. So this one won't produce a name error. So it simplifies Q. Q is shown to map to 5. So Q is 5. And it goes back to here and basically simplifies to print 5. And the computer prints 5. But this one, without initializing Q or defining Q, is just a name error. This will produce a name error. And print Q, and then the computer tries to simplify Q, but Q doesn't map to anything. So the computer stops the program, and it raises a name error. And by raise, I just mean create a name error. So here, a name error was created. And the formal word for that is raise. You won't need to know that. I will definitely cover that in the future. So this is just a review on simplifying expressions. If this all looks very unfamiliar to you, you might want to take a look again at lecture 2. And basically x equals 3 plus 1. Then it just becomes x equals 4. Then you initialize the variable of x, or change it from of x to 4. So I went over that pretty fast because you should already know it. Comments. A good programmer often has comments in their code to help themselves and others to see what they wrote and what it means. And this is a similar idea to a variable name, how you want to know what your code is doing. And one of the ways that you can do that is by making good variable names. But another way is by using comments. You can of course use both. A comment is just a line in the code like this. And the computer will just read it and then skip it because it's this special pound symbol, pound or hashtag or whatever is there. And the computer, as soon as it sees it, it's just gonna scan. Oh, pound. Okay, skip to the next one. Scan. Oh, another pound. Oh, skip to the next one. And so on. So you can also have comments at the end of your line. So it'll, once again, it'll say pound. Oh, skip until the next one. Scan. Oh, pound. I'm gonna skip to the next one. Oh, pound again. I'm gonna skip to the next one. And so when you have anything behind the pound is completely ignored by the computer, except for a new line. The computer won't ignore whatever's here, or where my cursor is right now. It won't ignore anything here, but it will ignore everything behind a pound. And a pound, it represents a single line comment, meaning that the comment, which is the stuff behind the pound, lasts for only one line. If you want a comment to last multiple lines, as you can see here, the computer ignores all of this too. So a multiple line comment, or just multi-line comment, is done with 3 triple double quotes. So that's shift quote 3 times. And then once you want to end the multi-line comment, you just do shift quote 3 times again. Now, the way that multi-line comments work in a similar fashion to single line comments is that it'll just scan and then say 1, 2, 3. Oh, these are all quotation marks. Okay, ignore everything until you find this again. And that's how multi-line comments work. So you can still put things behind here and it'll work just fine. But everything between the multi-line comments is ignored. You can see that single line comments, they're just grayed out, and multi-line comments are red. The color doesn't really matter, but if you like gray better than red, then use single line, I guess. But if you, multi-line comments are good if you want to have a really long comment here. In REPL.it, you saw that it just went around, right? So FOA, and then you just switch to S. That's not in all Python. And that's not in all Python editors. So you do want to, if a line is really long, it's just better to either put another single line comment like this, or of course, have the multi-line comment. Because a multi-line comment, as you can see, I started the comment after these quotes, and then ended like that. But you can also have it like this. But the important thing is multi-line comments are ignored starting from the 3 double quotes and ending at the 3 double quotes. And now this begs the question, what happens if you don't put the 3 at the end? Well, the computer will try to read, and it'll see these 3 and say, oh, ignore until it ends. And then it never ends. That's an error. So you need to have the 3 double quotes there to actually, to actually stop and end the code nicely. You may think that just because it's the end of the code, so it basically doesn't matter anymore, but it sort of does. So please do pay attention and end your multi-line comments. So comments are ignored by the computer, like I said, and only people that are looking at the code notice them or care. So you'll be writing tons of code, so use tons of comments. Now, there are two types of comments. There are single line and multi-line. Single line you can put on its own. You can also put after a line. Multi-line can span across multiple lines, and you can put multi-line comments at the end of a single line, at the end of a line that like works. So that works as well. See? Or it doesn't. Wait. Okay, so I guess it doesn't, but the rules vary slightly depending on where you are. So sometimes, so in general, put single line comments on their own or after a line, and multi-line comments on its own. In other words, I just went over this again. I keep repeating myself, but they begin with a pound and can be placed on its own or at the end of a line. Multi-line comments can span across multiple lines. And that's it. And this lecture has gone on for 21 minutes. So I'm going to stop the lecture here. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.